I was always opposed to the death penalty. I grew up in a house that was probably ambiguous about it, but the death penalty had sort of died of natural causes in this country. We had the death penalty, but we hadn't executed a lot of people in a long time by the time I'm, you know, I was born in 1955, so by the time I'm 10, it's 65. No one had been executed in Texas in several years, and then there was a kid called Ralph Carl Powers who was sentenced to death. He was from San Antonio, and local kid. It was in the local news, big case. And the kid that had died was a kid called Dickie Renfro, who came from a really good family around town. Now it was two carloads of kids that were kind of up to no good, both of them, and they ran afoul of each other in the parking lot of a supermarket at 11 o'clock at night or something on a weekend. They're out cruising, and something happened that there was a confrontation, and the upshot was it was Dickie Renfro, the kid that died, and the kid that came from the good family that owned the gun, that owned the pistol. But somehow Dickie Renfro ended up getting killed, and Ralph Powers probably pulled the trigger from all the evidence involved. And my father filed the case, and I think my father believed it in some cases. Maybe this wasn't one of them. I don't know. I can't go back and pick his brain too much, but I think he believed at that point that there were probably some heinous crimes where people deserved to be executed for it at that point. Later on, he did not believe in the death penalty. My father was writing a letter one day, and he kept writing it over and over again. He was at a desk in our dining room, and I asked him what he was doing. He said he was writing a letter to the governor of Texas, and that would be John Connally, who was shot, along with JFK and survived, and the first governor that I was aware of, growing up in Texas. I guess partially because of that. But he was writing a letter to the governor because the governor has, pretty much the most power as far as commuting a death sentence or a stay of execution on a temporary basis. Or anything. That's what you do, is you appeal to the governor. And my dad was writing the letter, and I said, he said he was writing a letter to the governor because he didn't think that this kid deserved to be executed. I said, well, did he not do it? And he said, no, I think he did it. But I just don't think it's fair what happened to him. And he explained it to me, and somehow it stuck when I was 10. And maybe I asked him about it a few years later when I could understand it a little bit better. I don't really recall. But, he and I talked about this when I was grown, and and neither one of us could figure out whether both of our memories of it were composites of different points in time. But the upshot was my father, who was an air traffic controller, grew up on a farm, the first person to get off of that farm in northeast Texas, had been in the Army for his little stint during the Korean War. Pretty regular kind of guy, decided to write this letter to the governor of Texas. He decided to take that personal action to write the governor of Texas. And I said, why? And he said, because it wasn't fair. And I said, why wasn't it fair? And he said, because he explained to me that there was a special prosecutor, a criminal attorney, who was one of those famous, most powerful criminal attorneys in Texas, was hired to prosecute the case. And basically, the state didn't have to do anything. A private firm, all of their resources, all those were brought to bear to make sure that not only was Ralph Carl Powers convicted, but that he received the death penalty. I think that was all there was to it to my father. I think he just thought it wasn't fair. I don't think he was making any sort of judgment about whether the death penalty was right or whether it was wrong. It was about fairness. And then for me, it was the beginning of a thing that I saw the movie In Cold Blood, and then I read the book, and it was just the beginning of a chain of things that happened between like 1967, I guess, is when the movie came out, and that's when I saw that. So I would have been 11 or 12, and then I read the book, and those things sort of. I was, as long as I was politically, as soon as I was politically for or against anything, I was opposed to the death penalty.